Okay. So then here's the second point. You started out like you were making the argument there that would. Here's the way I would sum it up. One day, when NA has more money, maybe even than China, instead of Smeb going to EDG, he will go to TSM, and that will allow them to win Worlds. Because we can all understand, right, that if Smeb really is the best top laner, well, that's a good way to potentially win a Worlds, is if you actually had the best player at your role. One problem with that, Loco. So the best players in the world did go to China, and they never won Worlds.
So, I mean, a lot of the problems...
Okay, come on, hit me.
A lot of the problems with Chinese teams and players going over to China, which this is actually going to help my argument, by the way, later on. You'll see why.
I'm sure it is, yeah.
They got worse in China.
Yeah, exactly.
They straight up got worse, and they were really demotivated because the infrastructure is not that great. And also, how they're being handled and how they're being coached, doesn't make them that motivated. Like, look at what's happening to Imp. Look at what's happening to Marin. But on the other hand, with players going over to NA and EU, arguably, I feel like some of the players got better by playing in NA and EU than playing in China. Like, I think a really, really good example of that would be Reignover and Huni and Piglet. I think playing and working with Piglet during Season 5 Spring was probably the best in his career, even better than Season 3. And Reignover and Huni, you can't deny they got better from playing in Europe and playing in NA. Like, NA and Europe has the infrastructure and has the motivation, and players are motivated to play well here. Like, we're seeing players play better by coming to this region instead of playing worse by going to China. I think you can name maybe one or two players that got better from playing in China. And these are no names. Like, players like Doinby got better from playing in China. But who the fuck cares about Doinby being better in China? Players like Piglet, Huni, and Reignover being better in NA and EU is much more supportive of NA and EU being a better environment for them and being better at using imports than China will.
And it's an example of something that every time and I'm not going to say that some Korean teams don't do this, because they do. They're no angels. The obsession that Western players have over minuscule amounts of gold is mind-boggling to me. Literally, the Haunter thing that I'm talking about right now would have meant that he would have had to have given up 150 gold or something in minions, 150, maybe 200 gold. And it's that he's not willing to part with the 200 gold that is guaranteed if he just simply goes down to the lane, because he doesn't.
Do you think he actually knows that though? Do you think he was even considering any of this? He just came and thought, I can get this farm, right?
I don't think, because sometimes, I feel like there's 4 steps to decisions in a way. One is the decision that involves only you. One is the leveling process, which involves what does the opponent want. And then there's the leveling process, which is I know that the opponent knows that I know this, which is like a poker thing. You keep going back and forth, and then you have to find the trade-off.
Sure.
And then the 4th one is finding a decision that can beat all the leveling processes and enables you an advantage. No matter what ends up occurring, we edge out here ever so slightly. Yes. The 4th step is something people often don't do. I mean, people don't do the 3rd step half the time. They're worried and preoccupied with themselves. So I think that it's because of how frequently this occurs in TSM's games, specifically with Haunter and all the Worlds games. I don't think it's being factored in. I don't think it's being entertained.
Well, here's a question then. Let's say your case is that Bjergsen and Doblev generally played well. They didn't play badly, at least. Mm-hmm. Between the two of them, they're supposed to be two of the best at their roles. Mm-hmm. In the West, definitely. And then actually, they're some of the only Westerners that people put near the Koreans and the Chinese, etc. Collectively, wasn't something missing from their overall games?
I think that they weren't able to exert as much lane dominance and pressure as they normally would be able to. And this is sort of like the stuff I was talking about earlier, where a diamond player looks fantastic when he's bashing on bronzes. But when a diamond player meets another diamond player, or maybe even a platinum player, he doesn't look like he's fantastic. And I think that that's basically what was occurring, is that there needed to be more team play happening. There needed to be more information being funneled, just across the map, and it wasn't occurring. And that really limits what you're able to do. So,
one area you've always been super critical of Western teams, and presumably in this case TSM, is the macro, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's not like they lost every game at 23 minutes and they just got pushed in every lane and ganked all over the place. You know, they were in some of these games that went longer. What would your assessment be of their macro?
So, something I talked about a little bit earlier on, I think I might even have tweeted about it. It seems like TSM, at least from... Like I say this with such confidence, and just because watching all their games at all of the stages where you would expect certain things from the team compositions, their acknowledgement about an enemy team comp, etc., was just absent from all the games. And what I mean by that is TSM might have a team composition, and they would not play out anything that the team comp would want to do. It just sort of seems like they're picking champions rather than picking it with a purpose. And the other thing was they could not seem to evaluate what the enemy team composition wanted.
No, but I mean, that's an extreme example of the fact that essentially what we're agreeing on is sometimes the coach does know, even the Western coach in Pickban, what probably you should do here to get the advantage. His problem is, and I've seen this a lot, is that the Western player isn't open enough. Like if he says, please pick this now, the Western player's like, no, I want to do something else. And then immediately it's literally the coach versus his own player at that point in time, not even versus the fucking opposing coach. Okay.
So a skill that's really, really heavily asked for in Western teams, and this is actually why I'm a pretty bad coach for Western teams, is being able to work with troublesome players and being able to coax them into your ideas and being able to fight the right battles. I do think it's a skill that I need to learn if I do continue coaching or whatever, and just in life. But in Korea, like, that's not a skill you need to learn as a coach. They just listen to you, like, in West. So I think that's why I really respect Reaper, Parse, and Tony. Is Tony's so good at this. Tony's somehow able to gather all his troops and then have them play his game plan and like just do things together. Like when everyone's just like shitting on CLG and they're like looked as underdogs, like Tony is somehow able to like just like make them drink the Kool-Aid and like just follow under him. And like you need that kind of skill to be a really great coach in an A teams. And I think it's kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
The point is, the Korean players even seek to please the coach. I mean, what an alien concept it is to so many Western teams I know of. Now, this factor, because it stems from a cultural factor of how the people are and how their culture has been for a long time, can't just be replicated identically. Probably wouldn't even suit Westerners anyway in terms of how individualistic they tend to be and how differently they think of their own goals and how to advance their own career on a personal level if you look at sports compared to the culture of Korea. And one of the things that I thought was quite interesting was he details essentially his life in America contrasted to what it was like in Korea playing for Korean teams versus what it's like playing for TSM, for example. And obviously TSM's pretty much the pinnacle of the Western teams in terms of infrastructure, amount of money they have to spend, resources, where you live, how you get taken care of, all these sorts of things. And what I found interesting was he was just saying all this stuff as, you know, kind of a day-to-day thing of like, here's what life's like, you wake up, you do this, here's what SoloQ's like. But personally, when I was listening to it, what I was actually getting from it was how interesting the gaps are within the Western scene that still haven't been filled, that are different from Korean esports and what it's like over there, but don't necessarily have anything to do with a lack of something that we have in the Korean scene. And so it actually, in some ways, he naively, for my money, exposed some of the Western excuses for not being as good as Koreans and Asians as being kind of bullshit on the grounds that the Westerners still aren't doing everything they need to do and are still slacking in many ways, which aren't necessarily affected by what they don't have in terms of lacking social or infrastructure aspects that they have in the Asian scene. Now, this in itself is a key point to make, because the same thing happens in Europe. It's something that Forgiven's said, where there's been certain really good pros, really good LCS players who've dropped out of challenge and have been down at like as low as master, and some even lower than that. Some actual LCS pros, admittedly not the really good ones in this sense, that have been down in diamond while they're in LCS. And then, so it's the same in the EU as it is in NA. But here's the point. So in NA alone, on the NA server, there are 10 teams with at least 5 players, the starters, and obviously some have subs. So that's 50 pros right there. Forget the amateurs. If those 50 pros were just playing SoloQ all the time and they were trying really hard in SoloQ and taking SoloQ seriously and trying to get as many points as they could and show how good they are in that sense, first of all, just them alone would make SoloQ way better on the pro level, at the top level, in terms of the quality of the games they'd have. They wouldn't be fucking around. They wouldn't be messing around and think, who cares about that? And rank doesn't matter to me in any sense. Obviously, it doesn't mean you're the best, but it is a way of showing like how good you are compared to people. Admittedly, it's a flawed system, but within that limited metric, as they're trying to do in Korea, where it's their life and death to try and get the top spot on SoloQ for most players. So even the pros themselves could take away part of that excuse by themselves trying, but they don't themselves, and then they'll even use the same excuse, yeah, but other people slack off and other pros slack off, and because other pros slack off, they use that as an excuse as to why they, as a pro, don't practice hard, and therefore it creates a self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling prophecy where then even they aren't doing it, even though they internally must know they probably should, and so no one is doing it. Pros aren't doing it, semi-pros aren't doing it, amateurs aren't doing it. There's a very inconvenient solo queue truth, which people in the West seem to ignore, despite the fact it actually fucks with some of their perception or excuses for why Korea is better. So think about this. If you frame it holistically, what are the strengths of the Korean scene? So people always cite it's got a massive population of players. Absolutely the case. Its solo queue is more serious. They try harder there. They're trying to play the right way. They're trying to win. They're trying to play efficiently. Absolutely the case. It's got a better infrastructure in Korea, as in team houses that are set up properly, good coaching with experienced coaches, disciplined, purposeful practice that's organized at certain times. People turn up, they play the right way, people play out the scrims for longer. These are all the case. But the middle point I made there about SoloQ being more serious, about being more try-hard, here's the problem with that. What does that have to do with any of the advantages of the Korean scene? Why would having a larger population of players make SoloQ at most of the top levels people playing seriously and playing hard? Some of these players, because there's so many players and so few spots, some of these players will never have a chance to be pros, yet they're trying hard, they're playing seriously, they're playing the right way, so it's good practice to play there. Likewise, with this fantastic infrastructure of team houses and coaching and disciplined practice, all of that happens to the players in SoloQ who aren't pros already after they've shown themselves by playing seriously in SoloQ and become good. It only applies to them after the fact. They don't get any of that at the beginning. In fact, how seriously they play and how they develop their skills within this excellent environment is what puts them in position to be recruited to those teams and then benefit from that infrastructure. Actually, none of these reasons suggest as to why the Korean solo queue is that way, as opposed to in North America, Europe, etc., when it's not as serious, where people aren't trying to the same degree and where it's not as competitive an environment. There is no easy excuse of infrastructure to say there. Now then, what are the cases that maybe help the Korean solo queue be this good? Well, first of all, it's deeply ingrained within Korean culture. There's this notion that you have a duty, that you have to try and do the best at whatever you do. And so when you do something, you try to be the best at it. When you want to accomplish something, you're going to put your efforts towards something. There's also the factor that, this is a theory of my own, that there's the sublimated work ethic that would have gone into their job or their school, but they're the person who's procrastinating by playing games, except when they go into that area, now they put all their efforts into that. They try as hard at that and they be nerds at that in the way they would at their schooling or at their job, being very diligent, doing a good job then and getting out, being very productive. There's the factor that in Korea, it's so pressed upon you to do well in your job, to do well in your schooling, that if you're going to waste your time on something else, you better make something of those efforts, because you've diverted away from what society wants and your pressures of all your family and everyone around you. So you better make something of what you have there. It's do or die if you're going to play seriously towards the top end of the scene. Now, all these factors do play a role within it, but I don't think there's a black and white answer as to why Korean solo queue is so much better and is such an excellent kind of litmus test for how good a player is or how he's developing as a player and where he stacks up in terms of skill. And I think it is an inconvenient solo queue truth that the West doesn't have a lot of these excuses when it comes to solo queue, which is the backbone, which is the spawning pool of the Korean talent, to explain why they don't have the same talent. It's not enough to simply say, we have less players. Okay, then in proportion, you should still have quite a lot of talent. There's not nearly the amount of talent that there is in the Korean scene. The infrastructure aspect of Korea doesn't apply there. So I think it's an interesting point to think about, to have that thought experiment to set up that way and realize that it's not as simple as stepping from A to B to C, and then because they've got B and C sorted in Korea, that means point A somehow is connected to that. It's not the case at all. So you go and look, like, in an ideal world, wouldn't we take all these players, just chuck them in the same pool and make a bunch of different lineups? Like, if I stop right now, look, I'll do it right now. We'll leave G2 as is. We're not going to fuck with G2. But let's say Koi just gets their fucking head in the game. And then instead, let's say instead of Shigenda, they'd side Irrelevant. So what a really good weak side player who's the odd pocket pick carry. So let's say they'd signed Irrelevant instead. And then obviously Malrang was never going to fucking last forever, was he? So let's say they'd signed a jungler. Could it have been Yankos? I heard he is cheap. Could it have been Marcoon? Let's say they signed Yankos. So let's say they now have Irrelevant, Jankos, Larson, Comp, and they used to have Trimby, right? They're already we're cooking with gas. That's a team that can win a split right now. Then let's go to Vitality. The main problem with Vitality is a mixture of rookies and languages, right? So we're going to have to take out one of Bo or Photon. So let's say we take out Bo and Jankos goes there, or Elyoya goes there. Wasn't that a banger signing? Let's say we keep Bo though, because he was the big talent, right? Let's say they sign Odoam there, or they sign Irrelevant, like... All these lineups, I'm just making them instantly better. I'm just making them already good. I mean, the XL one already, they could, in this first split, that could have been Jankos instead of Odoam there. Not Odoam there. Instead of Cersei, they could have had him, who is a good jungler, but his style obviously didn't fit the team, did he? And I've also heard, based on the other ones, maybe instead of Targamas, you just did a different player there because you needed someone like a bit feisty. The joke is actually if you'd kept Mickey X, it would have been a dream, but they couldn't, unfortunately. So I think it's the talent. The talent's spread out too much. Most of the big rosters failed, the big contenders. So as a result, people like BDS and Mad and XL eventually with a reworked roster are just foisted into contendership. G2 just chills, Bing chills on the same lineup that's way too good anyway and could have been even more insane. Like, this isn't the format, guys. Like, run this year back, as I hope they will next year, but with a better set of GM teams. It'll be an amazing format. Way better than the BO1s into the BO5, like the old LEC format we have. Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadjou, Mac Pugnatio Rajcula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Goh, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Scluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.